your first published book came out a while back. What was the inspiration behind the book? Can you give us an overview of what it's about? What all is in it a little bit? Tease it because we want people to buy it.
This is funny. So, if I may, I sat on this podcast with you maybe a year or two ago. I'm going to say 2 years ago, and talked about being a writer and the fact that like I have all these children's book ideas and I just needed a yes. I just needed something to come to be. And, what was going to happen and I don't know what's going to happen and just praying for something. And within a few months, I got a yes from a publisher. And so during COVID, I was writing a lot. And by February of 2021, I got a yes. And so I'm going to show you the book, but no one else can see it, but it's behind me. But the book is Dearest One. It exists. Lantana Publishing is my publisher. They're based in the UK. It is full of 12 affirmations, and this is why it's so aligned with like the mindfulness component of it all. So maybe you're right. I stay in the field. It's a great meditation, honestly. 12 affirmations or words of wisdom. It's written in the form of a letter from a grandparent to a little one, or written in the form of a letter to us as grown-ups, because I think grown-ups really appreciate it. So there are 12 of them, but I'll read the list to you. I could read them to you, but the affirmations are like dare to smile, embrace the rain, find music in the quiet, turn your face to the sun, which is my favorite because it says turn your face to the sun and stand tall as a sunflower. And I always love that because sunflowers are my favorite. Talks about self love. So show your self love. Take up space, which is like something I think we all have to remember that like we can take up space and not to kind of go into ourselves, and but remembering that like, we deserve to be here, being brave even when you're scared, being gentle with yourself, choosing your path, your own path, shining your light, remembering who you are. And that's when it comes into talking about your ancestry and passing on the stories of your ancestors. And that's because the book was coming from a grandmother's perspective. And then knowing true love, knowing pure true love. And so, yeah, that's the book. And so I really do love this book. Even if only one copy had sold, I would have been okay, because to me, please don't only sell one copy. I've clearly sold more than one copy. But for me, it was just sharing the message of what I hoped my grandmother would have said to me. She passed before I was born, and I had no idea what she would say. So I wrote this wondering what she would say to me. So, Dearest One, it's available on Amazon, bookshop.org, barnesandnoble.com. I don't know. It's like pretty much if you Google Dearest One and Ariel Dance, you'll find it.
As you've kind of moved through your career, you have this wide array of historical publications. I was going through your list and I'm like, I didn't realize I knew you published. I just didn't realize like it's a scroll. You just like everything you've done. It's amazing. And it ranges from the heady academic literature to public scholarship to media news articles. It's very impressive. And your particular focus on African Americana and Black studies. Talk a bit about your inspiration here. You alluded to this, of course, in your, sort of the foundational stuff that you were talking about with Dr. King and Malcolm X. Why does this history continue to be vital from your perspective as an academician, as a human?
I guess for me, it's important because it reflects my personal journey and my personal connection and understanding the plight of that discipline of African American history, which is different than African American studies. African American history is a field within African American studies, but it can be one and the same depending on who's teaching it. I guess for me, it's just I do what I feel that I'm called to do, I guess, and what I'm comfortable doing. So it's the material, the topic, the research, the venue has to speak to me. I mean, I'll sit around and think about it and pray about it, and then it just kind of flows. Um, More times the topic chooses me. I don't really choose a topic,
Interesting.
particularly nowadays. Nowadays, when I can write whatever I want to write and not be caught up in the whole, I've got to do this to become a tenured faculty member or associate or a full. And now it's like, okay, I do what I'm comfortable doing and what speaks to me. For example, the introduction of Black Studies book was a 7 or 8 year journey, because when I first started teaching out of grad school at Northern Kentucky University, there was no specific textbook that was aimed at the general public or first or second year students. Most of the material read like graduate texts. Not to say that it's bad, but when you're teaching first and second year students or first generation students or people from different backgrounds, the language was not accessible to those groups of folks.
I always admire people I meet who work in community-based nonprofits, because it is a wholly different animal, right? I mean, you're having to fundraise to survive, essentially, and get grants. Tell us a little bit about that. What were some of the highlights and the challenges of that experience, and maybe how did that frame your current frame of mind?
I got my bachelor's degree from San Diego State, go Aztecs, in psychology. And I wanted to go into social work and get my master's in social work after that. And I thought, well, if you're going to do that, maybe you should get a job in a nonprofit that kind of fits in that area. So I got a receptionist position at the Arc of San Diego, which is a nonprofit that provides services to people with developmental disabilities throughout the county. And I, found my way in. I quickly got promoted to managing the department. And I started at the Master's of Social Work program in San Diego State. I didn't make it a semester in that program, because I found this experience of instructors they were painting a picture of what the nonprofit sector was like and what social work was like while I was working in an organization, and what they would say and what I would experience on a daily basis was like, that doesn't quite work. So maybe I'm not meant to be a social worker. And I continued in the nonprofit sector because I loved the organization. I loved the people. I loved the clients that we were serving. And one of the things that I noticed during my tenure there was that our frontline staff, the people who worked in the group homes, the people who provided independent living services or other services, they gave 1,000% of themselves to taking care and making sure that, our clients were well cared for, loved, supported as people, as individuals. And they were making less money than someone working at McDonald's. And that really got to me. And it got me thinking about they've got these clients' backs for anything and everything. Who's got theirs? I think it's going to be me.
Yes. Yeah.
It's going to be me. I'm going to make darn sure that everyone is taken care of in that space. I ended up staying at that organization for 13 years. I ended up getting my master's in nonprofit management as a result of that. It had a lot of influence over how I started to see the world and what I could expect from myself to contribute to that space.
That's very good.
Yeah. And so from the social work sector, I moved into an executive role at an international conservation organization where we protected and saved sea turtles, which was amazing because they were in Japan, they were in Mexico. So I was traveling to Mexico and really stretching out of my comfort zone. And that was magical. That was magical. But then we got absorbed. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Before you go on, how do you end up in San Diego and then moving into a nonprofit that's doing work to save sea turtles? Like, where's the bridge there?
Well, at the end of my time at the ARC, I had gone after a higher leadership position that had opened up. And I went after it. Another person in the organization, we were really close friends. She went after it as well. We were both like, whoever gets this is going to be great. And the person doing the hiring ended up hiring someone outside of the organization. And so that kind of, I understand why. When you have two internal candidates, you probably want to not put either of them in a weird position. But it kind of prompted me to think like, okay, well, if I'm going to grow, because I had been managing the department for basically all of that time, if I'm going to grow, I need to create that opportunity for myself. So I started looking at positions, and a director of finance and operations position came available for an organization that did that work. And I applied and was hired, and I think a week later was in Mexico.
Neurofeedback, with the tools you use, are you able to then chart it in real time? Like, kind of, here's what the brain is doing, the electrical waves they're doing, or what's happening when someone is anxious or depressed or excited or what have you?
Yeah. So, for instance, with ADHD, that is a frontal lobe difficulty. They have a lot of excess theta. Theta is a slow brain wave. It's about 4 hertz or so. And that's why a lot of times you're wondering, why does someone with ADHD that's hyperactive take a stimulant? Wouldn't that just make them more hyper? Well, the answer is they're hyperactive because it's their body's way of naturally trying to compensate for that slow brain wave. They're trying to up the activity. So when you take a stimulant, it speeds up that brain wave so you can focus and be still and calm more. And so that's kind of a neat dynamic there.
Interesting.
But with neurofeedback, we're able to measure, oh, yeah, you have a slow brainwave dominance there. And this could be a possible symptom of ADHD. Let's train your brain to kind of speed up. And so we can reward other brainwaves and suppress the theta brainwave to encourage it and reinforce the better activity of the brain.
Very good. Wow. It's like you should teach this as well.
Oh, well, maybe one day I'll be Professor Walker.
I think a PhD's in your future, Rebecca.
Oh, I do. I think so.
Yeah, that was really, really well stated. And I think for our general audience, so many people hear about it, and then when the switch flips for a lot of folks, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense, that you can really track that. That's really great. So when you look at the kind of span of your work and your business, and please don't have to share individual stories, but if you have anecdotes, where have you seen this really play out in a way that has either benefited mental health or given you or your husband or both of you more insights into clients that you've been working with? What has emerged for you from there?
I think 2 things. First off, I feel more compassionate for human beings in general because I get a look at what their brain is telling me. We had a man with an anger management problem. And if you look at his brain and how he has this inability for impulse control, or it explains why it's harder for him to keep his temper under wraps. Now, it doesn't justify it by any means, but it helps me be more compassionate by, your brain struggles in different ways than my brain does. And I don't know what that's like. And that must be really hard, but way to be coming to therapy to try and help with this. And so that's probably the biggest thing, is I'm a more compassionate person because of it. I think the second one is, we all want to do a career that's fulfilling. And for us, what's fulfilling is when we see success with our clients. And when we had agoraphobic person that's afraid to go outside, afraid to do anything, they're a high school student, they were in a band, and their mom basically took them everywhere if they went somewhere. And this person would throw up every day because of anxiety, every single day. And after doing neurofeedback, they were able to go out to the store alone without their mom for the first time in years. They were able to go out with their friends. They were able to have a quality of life given to them. And they no longer threw up every day. It was about once a month. And that was right before a band performance where you normally have some anxiety to perform there. And to me, it's those stories that are like, wow, what I'm doing, yes, it's paying the bills, awesome, but it is affecting people's lives, and I get to see that. I get to see their testimonies of it.
So maybe talk for a minute, because I'd like to hear your experience, and then dive in a little bit to your research on the Iraq War and its impact on marriages. But take it away. Let's hear from you on that.
Okay, well, about being a military spouse and living that lifestyle, because it really is a subculture. It really is a different culture. And prior to living that lifestyle, I was a very independent woman who had already, I felt like, lived a life. And let's go back. Let's step back a little bit. I was raised by a very independent woman who raised me the same way. And so when I went out into the world to start exploring and living my adventures, even in high school, she didn't keep me back. And she said, Summer, if you're going to make a misstep, great. You're going to learn from that. That's wisdom. That's something to apply to your next steps. And I don't think she, as a young woman, was given that opportunity. Her parents really held the reins very tightly. And so she really wanted a different experience for me. And she allowed me a lot of freedom. And so with that freedom, a lot of parents today will be like, well, isn't that too much? Well, it wasn't for me. And yet I still did the teenage things. I still did, had the silly missteps, but I learned too. And it wasn't conversation that was taboo, or I wasn't shamed for it. It was, let's have a conversation and talk about the consequences to, the choices that you made, or let's talk about what you learned from A, B, or C. Right. And so I love that about my mother, that she was able to really set that foundation. And so as I moved through the world, and even as I got married and became a military spouse, my husband and I were friends, and we were friends before the military, 7 years before he joined. And so we had an idea of each other's personalities, how we communicated, how we functioned together. And then he joined the military. And so I knew him and I understood him. And I also understood, as we really got further into that journey, that military journey, how we were still going to communicate, but there were different factors that were going to influence that communication now. And those factors were the commands, the immediate command, the larger command, and the orders. And really at that point, I'm like, he doesn't really have a choice. And for me, that was really difficult. Like, okay, we have orders and we don't really have a choice where to go. And I'm like, oh no. How am I going to really understand this, really navigate through this, where it's going to fulfill me too, where I'm also going to have a purpose, where I'm going to, and that was hard. I will have to say, for 10 years, that was really difficult, because I fought it for 10 years. I was like, man, I'm not an independent. And that's how they refer to you. You're an independent. You have a military card. That gets you around. That's the thing that allows you to do A, B, and C. And that being called that dependent, or, by the military, I'm like, oh man, that feels weird. And so I fought it, and I was like, ooh, and that resistance. And my husband's like, man, she's going to fight it. But at the same time I was fighting it, I was still integrated into the community, wanting to do things. And that's what was funny, because the spirit and who I am, I was like, I still want to help people. I don't care if you're in the military or elsewhere, but I was working with the Armed Forces YMCA and creating programs at Camp Pendleton. And I was building out programs so that we would reduce issues where they would go off base, spend their entire paycheck in a weekend and, get in fights or whatever the case may be. I was creating, social programs on that base with the Armed Forces YMCA to really reduce that behavior. And so I really enjoyed that. I started working with the chaplain to really bring military spouses together because the line of communication it wasn't great. And I'm like, how can we improve this? So I was looking for areas that I could integrate myself, my skill set, what I wanted to bring and have purpose at the same time into that whole culture. And so as I continued on with that journey with my husband, I was like, okay, I'm going to still be myself. I'm going to still be able to do A, B, and C, but I'm going to do it in a different way. And each move, I got a job that either helps support the community or helps the military community or our civilian community in some way. And I really enjoyed it. And once I just let go and said, okay, this is it, right? I'm all in. Like I'm totally all in. And that happened right after I graduated from Saybrook.
What's your backstory here? How did you get involved in the sport and where did it take you?
Well, I started as a child. I have an older brother who's 5 years older, and he really introduced me to the game. I remember when I was a real little kid, he would turn on the baseball game on TV, and I didn't want to watch it. And then we would go outside, and he would show me how to throw and hit and so forth. And I just really took to it quickly, and I really just became fascinated with the game. And over time, I showed that I had some skill in the game. And I played in the Little League and the Pony League and so forth. And I just progressed. And I can remember I was a kid. I went to a family gathering and somebody asked me, an aunt asked me, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I want to be a baseball player. They said, oh, you'll change your mind when you get older. I said, no, I won't. I said, that's what I want to be. So anyway, that's how I really got into it. And when my skill set progressed, I saw that it was not only something that I loved doing, but something that I was proficient in and something that I could possibly have a career in. So my mom and dad, while I was encouraged to play baseball, they wanted me to do something else. Wanted me to prepare for something else because they said, baseball players can get injured and your career might get short, and we want you to have something else as a background. So that's when my mom's is a teacher. She was a teacher and former teacher of the year back in 1973 in Chicago. And she was also a psycholinguist. And she would talk to me. She really loved psychology, but she was a teacher. She was a grade school teacher and worked with kids and language issues. And she would tell me about the psychologist and how she had a good rapport with the psychologist. And she told me about school psychology. And that's when I first heard about it as a kid.
And why was that focus so important to you, that non-academic focus, critical from your point of view?
Because I think academia in some ways has become unintentionally, I don't want to say elitist, but I want to say a great number of folks in general may not have access to academia. And so how do they have access to the discussions that could change their communities if they're not in academia? And so I wrote that book in a way to, if somebody would just pick it up who has nothing to do with the academy, would say, this is an idea I can take into the community to understand more intentionally how we can use art as a way to improve the concept of social justice, or how sociology can be used to deal with the prison industrial complex, as they call it in academia, and in non-academic terms is how we can deal with the disproportionate of Black folks going into the criminal justice system. And what do you do about it? So that's for me, is to kind of uncouple the academic language and make it plain, as the song used to say from James Brown.
It's beautifully written, and I think you called attention to so many important things. I was one of the things that I am excited about, I think, is we source this around our university and other connected entities. Our sole focus is in psychology, but it was our founding discipline, and many of our current day faculty have really focused on the importance of Black voices in psychology, not just in the academic realm, but in the therapeutic room, in the creation of greater understanding of Black wellness, Black well-being, mental well-being and health, and how to address those major issues. And I think your book really, I know it's not like a huge socio or psychological focus, but what you're saying resonates so importantly, I think, in this and many other spaces. So just sort of reiterating that in a different way from the psychological point of view.
I think you're right, and I did that intentionally because just the lack of folks of color who go into psychology and even counseling. I mean, from a cultural standpoint, not to say a person who's not a person of color can't be a counselor for a person of color, but it does help in some instances, actually maybe in a lot of instances, if that person of color is a counselor, can understand the plight, the psychological dimension of being a person of color in the United States, that sometimes it's mentally and emotionally feels attacked on a regular basis. And you don't have to have that discussion from a counselor. They can just say, yeah, I know what you're saying, because they may feel the same way. The mental health was a thing, as I call people. I tell people mental health was a thing for people of color before it was called mental health, because they were feeling like they're being attacked for the larger society. And how do you deal with those emotions? How do you deal with the spiritual attack on who you are as a person? It's mind-boggling. And so psychology is a field that was created in certain ways as a Western canon, and didn't take in consideration other cultures, particularly African culture or African American culture.
When we look at the medical establishment right now, what does it get right when it comes to women? What does it get wrong? How about with marginalized groups? Where is this? Where are we at with all of this? Because you mentioned the 20-year diagnosis gap, even with endometriosis alone.
I don't know if I can answer this question easily.
Fair enough.
So I work in health equity. This is a good bridge. So my work is in health equity at the American Cancer Society. And I think what we're seeing, and even since the pandemic, I mean, delay in diagnosis is something, but delay in screening, and it's not us, American Cancer Society. I'm talking about me, Ariel, what I read, what I see, right? You see people who are afraid to go to the doctor. You see still medical mistrust, which has been, I mean, tale as old as time. Medical mistrust is a tale as old as time, right? People still afraid to go to the doctor. People are afraid to get bad news. And then how are we helping to combat that? How are we having conversations with people? You see lack of accessibility, and I'm saying accessibility on a disability stands, on a literacy stands. We're not meeting people where they are. We're not having conversations with people, or changing our buildings or changing our literature to make things more readable and accessible for humans. And I mean, there's just so many things. Health equity in itself is just a whole umbrella. And I feel like as our world is trying to shift upward, we're leaving so many people behind. And we're just saying they got to catch up if they want to stay healthy, or just telling them all the things they're doing wrong without trying to help them get better.